Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's my very great personal pleasure to introduce our next speaker and our very good friend, the Honorable Jack Kemp. He's probably best remembered as the author of the Kemp-Roth tax cut plan. Jack, you would have been proud when David greeted the President Bush at our White House briefing and gave him a letter, and it said, "Read our lips, no tax increases." Jack Kemp was clearly one of the leading architects of the Reagan economic revolution. And I know this is a bipartisan group, but I think you'll let me get away with mentioning the Reagan economic revolution, because this has truly been a renaissance in economic growth and development that came out of the concept that Jack Kemp was so much an architect of cutting taxes, reducing the burden of government, and stimulating private sector economic growth. 80 months of unbroken economic growth. That's a record that this gentleman and we can all be proud of. And Jack, we all remember the days when there were a lot of unbelievers and doomsayers. Remember when they were making fun of supply-side economics? Nobody talks about that anymore, but there was a time that was called a fumble. Well, we call it a touchdown. And we say that you have been lighting up a lot of scoreboards ever since. I remember, and I know a lot of you that are in the room will remember when Jack Kemp spoke to us talking about tax cuts. I think it was at a board meeting, at an ALEC board meeting, annual meeting in Philadelphia, and I've lost track of what year it was. But I do remember that there were probably not more than about 10% of the number of people that are in the room tonight. And Jack, you've been a longtime friend, and we're grateful for the support that you've given us. I think you'll agree with me that Jack has made the Department of Housing and Urban Development a very high visibility position. But we know that this is a man of ideas. He is a man of unbelievable passion for our country and for the ideas of economic growth and opportunity for everyone. And we know, Jack, that you're going to bring a new vision, a new source of energy, and a new sense of purpose to your department. Ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor and a privilege and a personal pleasure to me to present you the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, the Honorable Jack Kemp.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ellen. Thank you. Take a moment to thank you very much. Thank you, Dara. Thank you. Ellen Sowerby, thank you so much for that very gracious introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for that very warm welcome back to ALEC. I'm honored to be with you tonight at this, the 16th anniversary of the founding of the American Legislative Exchange Council. Let me congratulate David Halbrook of Mississippi, your chairman, who's done such a great job in the past year. Congratulate Frank Messersmith of Florida for the great job he's going to do. Dave and Frank make a great team. And Ellen, thank you again for the very thoughtful introduction. Let me just say what an honor it is to be in your presence and how upset I am with Sam Brunelli. I heard all of those wedding anniversaries being celebrated tonight, and Brunelli said to me a number of months ago, "Kemp, if you're not in Monterey, California in July, it's just not going to work. We can't get any great speakers. It's going to fall flat on his face. He begged, he borrowed, he cried, he shed tears of crocodile proportions. And I heard that you have had not only Bill Bennett and Dan Quayle, but tomorrow Sam Skinner and Gary Bauer and my friends from the Heritage Foundation and so many great speakers that I got to tell all of the couples who are celebrating their anniversary tonight, 31 years ago, this night, I honeymooned with my wife Joanne in this community, Carmel, California, and my wife tonight is in Washington. I'm here. So if you want to get up at 5:30 a.m. and see me off to Washington, you'll know I am glad to be here because notwithstanding the celebration that will take place in my family this weekend, I wanted to be with you. One, because I kind of came to Congress, as Ellen pointed out, when you all were at your genesis, at the inception of the idea of ALEC. As Ellen pointed out, I've been a longtime friend and fan of those men and women who at the local level, the state level, are doing such a great job to make our small d democratic form of government work. This crowd is unbelievable. I wish you could sit up here and look out on this beautiful crowd. Not since Thomas Jefferson dined alone at the White House have so many great minds been together for one dinner. Said John F. Kennedy in 1962. And I hope someday in my modest pursuit of a higher profile, as Ellen put it, for HUD, I might deserve one of those busts of... Anybody who did not get a Thomas Jefferson bust, please take a step forward. Very seriously, Tom Jefferson brings out the best in all of us. He brings out the Republican in the Republicans, and he brings out the Democrat in the Democrat. He is our champion, our idol, our intellectual heritage. He's our president. He's our lodestar. He is the moral compass of the conservative movement in America. And I love this quote. How did we know that Thomas Jefferson in 1776, how could we have known that he would be writing about HUD in 1989? I mean, read this. It is unbelievable, the vision and the perspicacity that Sam, perspicacity means the ability to look far into the future. But Tom Jefferson said, we want our Constitution to be a limitation on the power, obviously, of the central government, the federal government, he said, and we don't want to see the day when all of the offices are transferred to Washington, D.C., where further they are withdrawn from the eyes of the people, that they may be more secretly be bought and sold at the market. Ladies and gentlemen, he knew more about HUD in 1776 than... But, I want to pledge to you one thing here tonight. And Ellen, I appreciate you stealing my favorite line. I told the president the other day before he left for Paris and Warsaw and Budapest and Eastern Europe, I told the president that I wanted to take this obscure federal agency to a very high profile. I didn't have in mind what's happened, but I'll tell you folks this. I'm going to be one conservative that cleans it up. We're going to make HUD work for the people, not the greedy. We're going to make it work for the war on poverty, not those who make money from poverty. You didn't hear my line. I said, I want to wage war on poverty. I don't want our programs to work for those who want to make a profit from poverty. You see, there are some folks who are really, they're not conservative. They're not really modeled after Mr. Jefferson if they see these programs and policies and efforts to bring about urban and rural economic development and housing and home ownership for the poor. Anyone who would make a profit on something like that does not deserve the name of a conservative. I'm not speaking about any one man or woman. I'm simply suggesting that we have a higher ideal. We have a tremendous moral obligation, those of us in either party, to make sure that we live up to the high standards for which Mr. Jefferson and James Madison, Patrick Henry, Ben Franklin, George Washington, and all the founders lived up to. You're wise to celebrate Tom Jefferson. I think I might have mentioned this in Washington when we gathered just a few months ago, but it bears repetition here tonight. In 1800, he ran against the Federalist Party. In 1800, if you read the great history of Thomas Jefferson, the campaign of 1800 was bitter, divisive, ad hominem, pejorative, mean, nasty, rotten, divided the country between the Federalists and the emerging Republican Party. It was called at the time the Democratic Republican Party. I love the words, to put Democrat and Republican together, because that's what ALEC stands for, putting small d Democrats and big R Republicans together. And David and Frank and all of the men and women in this room who are helping to make our democracy work, we should celebrate Jefferson. Because as he said at the end of that campaign, and I know, David, this means a lot to you as a patriotic Democrat, and it means the same to me as a very patriotic Republican, as I know it means the same to all the men and women in this room. Thomas Jefferson, after the bitterness of that campaign, said, we're all Democrats. We're all Republicans, because we are Americans first. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we're all Americans. We're all proud in celebration of the great system of government that tonight in Gdansk, Poland, there is a great leader of solidarity who said recently, Lech Walesa said recently, when President Bush was in Gdansk and Warsaw and Częstochowa, Lech Walesa said, we want for Poland to be an America in Eastern Europe. When the students were marching through the streets of Beijing and were in Tiananmen Square, they didn't quote Mao Zedong, they didn't quote Karl Marx, they didn't quote Lenin, they didn't quote Trotsky, they quoted Patrick Henry and Thomas Jefferson and Dr. Martin Luther King. That points up how important it is what we're doing here tonight. What ALEC stands for making the free enterprise system more free and more enterprising. It stands for making democracy more democratic, small d, more answerable to the people of America, because we're living in one of the most revolutionary moments in the life of our nation. David, I loved your statement of celebrating the Long March. You did it as a metaphor, but it fits perfectly. The Long March is a metaphor for revolution. And I think it's great that conservatives can celebrate a revolution. Because while at the same time we are conservative, we are simultaneously revolutionaries. While at once we are conservative, we are at the same time radical. While at the same time we are Republican, we must be Democratic. And while we are Democratic, we must be Republican. We must be men and women committed to making this system work, because not only is this country looking at us, the whole world is looking at us. I told some students on Capitol Hill the other day when I spoke to 750 young interns on Capitol Hill who are serving in Democratic and Republican offices on Capitol Hill, I was telling them as young college and high school students, what an exciting time to be alive. What a great time to be in college, or to be in high school, or to be a legislator, or to be working and living in modern day America. Students in Beijing are hosting up the Statue of Liberty. Workers in Poland are voting against communism, and they're voting for democracy and freedom and their version of private enterprise. People in Africa and Asia and Latin America are not celebrating left-wing revolutionary ideas. They're celebrating, frankly, private enterprise and free markets and free men and free women and free trade and free enterprise and entrepreneurial democratic capitalism. Ladies and gentlemen, we are living at a revolutionary moment in the history of the world. In the history of the world. Except I told the students there's just one difference between living today and living in 1776. In 1776, they didn't have a telly. They couldn't watch on television George Washington cross the Delaware. And today we can. You say, well, Kemp, Mr. Washington didn't cross the Delaware on television. But ladies and gentlemen, students in Beijing laid down their very lives in front of tanks for not something abstract. Maybe they don't totally recognize what it takes to make a democracy work, but let me ask you a question. Who would have thought it would have worked in the United States of America 213 years ago? Can you imagine living in 1776 and watching on the evening news Mr. Washington, General Washington, taking his troops across the Delaware? Wow. Can you imagine living in 1776 and watching on C-SPAN the debate in the Continental Congress over the Declaration of Independence? Today on C-SPAN, you may not think the Congress is the Continental Congress. And there's good reason. But nonetheless, the metaphor fits. The instant ability to communicate. The instant ability of you as a legislator to communicate with your electorate. The instant ability of the businessmen and women and the enterprises that are represented so progressively in this room here tonight to communicate with the consumer, but more important, the incredible instantaneousness of the consumer's ability to communicate with the company, with the business, with the enterprise. The ability to purchase or not to purchase a product or a service. What an amazing time it is to be alive. Charles Dickens wrote a book called The Tale of Two Cities. He wrote it about 200 years ago this month, because just a few days ago we celebrated the so-called storming of the Bastille, July 14th in France, which they celebrate as the 200th anniversary of their revolution and their beginning of a very incredible path towards their democratic and republican form of government. We take it so much for granted. How unwise it is to take freedom for granted. But how tremendously imperative it is for members of ALEC and those men and women in this room, minority though we may be in the state legislatures of America or even in the government of the United States, how important it is to impress upon this country that democracy takes education, that democracy takes people who are committed to making it work, that democracy takes men and women who have a fiduciary responsibility to live up to the highest standards of ethics. And how important it is to have men and women in office at all levels who understand what is the genius of the American democracy. About 150 years ago, a Frenchman came to the shores of the United States, and then he went back after spending about 8 weeks in the United States of America, wrote a book called Democracy in America. His name is hard to pronounce for someone, but we all read it in high school and college, Alexis de Tocqueville. He wrote that great book, Democracy in America. He said, the genius of America is not to be found in her harbors and rivers and valleys. It's not to be found in her fertile fields or boundless prairies. He said, the genius of America and the genius of the American democracy is to be found in her people. He said, not until I met the people of America did I understand the genius of America. And then he said something that sits over our shoulder and reminds us every day of our obligation to those responsibilities that we as free men and women have in our democratic form of government. He said, America's great because she's good, comma. And he said, if she ever ceases to be good, she will cease to be great. And let me ask you this question, rhetorical though it may be. If we want to be good, if we want to continue to be great, if we want to be that shining city on a hill, how is it possible that we can be an example to the rest of the world of how democracy can work for all people unless we make it work for those who have been left out, left behind, who some might consider the least or the last or the lost? You see, our conservative model, or as I call it and discussed with Sam so many times, our progressive conservative model. People say, well, Kemp, you can't talk about progress and conservatism simultaneously. It's oxymoronic, like congressional ethics. But ladies and gentlemen, that is not an oxymoron. We are conservative in terms of the values we want to defend and protect and preserve and conserve and husband. And we're progressive in terms of our willingness to work for change and our willingness to work for emancipation, liberation, freedom, trade, commerce, industry, binding down politics and politicians from rascality and making sure that there's law and respect for law. George Will wrote a great column. Maybe it wasn't George Will. I think it was Michael Novak, to come to think of it. He wrote a great column recently in one of the Washington newspapers. He said, the problem with the Statue of Democracy in Tiananmen Square was it held up the lamp of reason and it didn't have the book of the law. Mine is not to stand up here and criticize the students who gave their lives for freedom and democracy in Tiananmen Square. As Ronald Reagan said, they did not give their lives in vain. He said, you cannot crush an idea. You cannot massacre, he said, an idea. An idea whose time has come, Victor Hugo said, is the most powerful force on this earth. And I want to say here tonight on the 16th anniversary of this great organization and this great movement, the ideas are with conservatives. The ideas are with progressive conservatives. The ideas of making the free enterprise system work for the people, making it work for the poor, making it work for the urban homesteader, making it work for those who are left out and left behind and who might be considered least and last and lost. And tonight, not only do we celebrate Thomas Jefferson, not only celebrate the men and women who've had so much to do with making Thomas Jefferson's principles and ideals and values work in government, we're also celebrating the ability to take those ideas and bring them to the surface and to bring them to manifestation, not only here in America in 1989, but ladies and gentlemen, stop and think. We're on the eve of the next decade. We're on the eve of the next century. We're on the eve of the next millennium. It's going to be a millennium and a century of democracy and entrepreneurial capitalism and freedom. It is not the age of the dictator, President Bush said in his inaugural address. He said the age of the dictator is over. It is now the age of the people. and we must represent the people, and to represent the people, you've got to do what's in their interest, and to put their interest ahead of any personal gain is what the Good Shepherd commands of us. It's what conservatism is all about. It's why Thomas Jefferson wrote those words that are strung throughout the memorial to Thomas Jefferson in Washington. When you come to Washington and you go to his memorial and you stand in awe of the statue of our leader and mentor and coach and rabbi and father confessor and founding father, you see where he said, I have sworn. How many of us are willing to swear on the altar of God Almighty eternal hostility, he said. Now imagine the passion of a Jefferson saying, I have sworn on the altar of God Almighty eternal hostility against every form of tyranny over the mind of men. Wow. Can you imagine so much passion? Can you imagine someone saying, as Jefferson said, that I have sworn on the altar of God Almighty, eternal hostility against every form of tyranny. Drugs, as Bill Bennett reminded you today, is a form of tyranny over the mind of our children and over the mind of men and women. Poverty can be a form of tyranny that you and I should be helping to lift and to liberate people from. How can we be true to the Jeffersonian ideal if we're not interested in fighting poverty, and particularly to those men and women who know how to fight poverty? Adam Smith, I suggested in my last speech to ALEC, did not write a book called An Inquiry into the Nature and Cause of the Poverty of Nations. Study poverty, Bob Woodson reminds us, and you get poverty. Study poverty, Stuart Butler and Anna Kondratis in their magnificent book on a conservative war on poverty remind us, if you study it, you get it. Ladies and gentlemen, we should be studying success and wealth. Adam Smith reminded us that he didn't write that book about the wealth of big nations and white nations or Anglo nations or prosperous nations or industrial nations or northern nations. Wouldn't you have loved to be at that conference of third world nations in Paris and told them about the book? The book. It's there. Any nation on this earth that practices private property and limited government and sound taxation, i.e. low tax rates on labor and capital and investment and risk takers and venture capitalists and entrepreneurs. Any nation that practices the rule of law, any nation that practices democratic capitalism, any nation that practices fiscal responsibility, any nation that practices sound economic and social and political policies will become wealthy. Black nations and Anglo nations and climate country nations that are cold or hot or north or south. Ladies and gentlemen, there's certain things that work and certain things that don't work. You're making those work in the laboratories of the state. I want to make them work at HUD. President Bush wants to make them work for our nation. But the great goal of America, greatest goal of all, is to make sure that all of those nations who are now looking to us, Poland and Hungary and Czechoslovakia, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Hungary, Yugoslavia, Georgia, the Ukraine, Africa, Asia, Latin America, the Caribbean, nations that practice sound policies will grow and prosper and liberate. And nations that practice bad economics and bad politics will be tyrannies over the mind of men. What I appreciate about Mr. Jefferson, he said that is the greatest tool of development on this earth, to liberate the human mind. George Gilder is coming out with a book. It's called Microcosm. I want to mention a couple things that we can celebrate tonight. Here we are 16 years after the birth of ALEC. And tonight, as we celebrate the conservative, progressive, free enterprise, radical, revolutionary, people-oriented, free enterprise, limited government, private property-oriented ideas are on the march, not only in America, but in every state in the country, from California to New York, but also they're on the march in the world. But isn't it, aren't you thrilled? Aren't you thrilled as am I, that the intellectual movement and vitality is on our side tonight? The left have totally become discredited morally, spiritually, economically, politically. The whole world is turning their back on left-wing egalitarian ideals, and they're looking to the markets. They're looking to people. And that's a celebration of conservative principles. Tom Peters, George Gilder's book, Wealth and Poverty, will be now superseded by his new book, Microcosm. Hernando de Soto has come out with a new book about mercantilism of the left and the right called El Otro Sendero, The Other Path, a story of the Peruvian effort to liberate the private sector. Judy Shelton's book, The Collapse of the Soviet Empire and Their Economy. Greg Fosdill's book, The Democratic Imperative. Stuart Butler and Anna Kondratis of the Heritage Foundation's book on Waging War, a Free Enterprise Conservative War on Poverty. Heritage Foundation's Mandate for Leadership. Zig Ziglar, Tom Peters, ladies and gentlemen, the whole intellectual movement in America is on the side of the men and women in this room. Take the moment. This is the zeitgeist. The critical mass of the world is in this room, if you believe, But did you think, no matter your age, did you think that 16 years after the foundation of ALEC, that we would be watching legislatures from Gdansk, Poland, to Latin America, to Asia and Africa, recognizing what so many of us take for granted all too often? I think it's a thrilling time to be alive. I thank Pat Nolan for his leadership in California on behalf of Enterprise Zones. I thank the men and women who have had so much to do with pursuing the idea of urban homesteading and giving residents in public housing a chance to own and manage and control their own lives. Even our friends on the left are beginning to recognize that we should be celebrating home ownership and a piece of the rock and private property and equity, even for those who have rented or lived in public housing. Tonight you are honored with a young woman's presence. A young woman who came up out of poverty, who raised a family from welfare, sent them to college, stands head and shoulders over so many who have never seen the light. She expresses her gratitude in such a way as to make you so proud to be a friend of hers. She stands for decency and integrity and home ownership and those values that we elevate tonight here at this ALEC 16th anniversary dinner. I want to have her stand up, not to embarrass her, but to remind you of one very important thing. I said a little bit earlier, people don't care how much you know until people know that you care about them. We must not leave behind those in urban or rural America who are trapped, impoverished, tyrannized by poverty or homelessness, or helplessness or despair. She stands here tonight as one of us, but yet she'd be equally welcome in any community in the United States of America. I want to introduce her. I want her to stand up. I want you to greet an entrepreneur, a free enterprise, a small C conservative, a small P progressive, a small D Democrat, a small L liberal, a small J Jeffersonian. But most important, she is an American. Kimmy Gray. Kimmy, stand up, woman. Stand up. Let her turn around. Let everybody see you. Yeah. I think she's on a panel tomorrow. Don't miss her. She's the only woman that can talk faster than Jack Kemp and Congressman Bob Dornan together. But she's a sweetheart. I think you can tell how much you mean to me. I hope you realize how important these ideas are. That conservatives find solutions to the problems of the homeless. That conservatives understand the need for economic development and the creation of more entrepreneurship among those who feel as if they have been left behind. How important it is to have home ownership and urban homesteading. How important it is to be able to have affordable housing and home ownership and to fully invest our time and energy in fair housing and open housing and the sense of giving people the feeling that they too are Americans. I'm so proud tonight that my Undersecretary for Intergovernmental Affairs has been with you for a couple of days, as has his assistant, my assistant, but I'd like him to stand. He's a former council member of the city of Cincinnati, a former pro football player, a former mayor, and he's now my Undersecretary for Intergovernmental Affairs and a good friend of yours, the Honorable Ken Blackwell of Cincinnati, Ohio. Ken, thank you for coming. And when I came to HUD, and I want a lot of good ideas, not only did I read Mandate for Leadership, I brought a lot of heritage people with me. And not only is Anna Kondratis, my Assistant Secretary for Community Planning and Development, I brought along another top heritage person, Mildred Weber-Pasco. Mildred, where are you? Stand up, Mildred. I appreciate all the... Where are you, Mildred? Stand up, Mildred. Where is she? Well, anyway, Mildred, thank you for the hard work you're doing. Let me just stop with this thought. Attitude. On our kitchen refrigerator, my wife has a little saying, problems are opportunities disguised as insurmountable barriers. When the former Secretary of HUD for the ancient city of Jerusalem, Nehemiah, he was the HUD Secretary, didn't you know that? Nehemiah was charged with the responsibility of rebuilding Jerusalem. The walls had been torn down and the gates had been burned. He prayed about it, and he came to his folk and he said, come. Now, a lot of folks in the conservative movement throw up their hands and say, I don't give a damn, or I don't care. You wouldn't be an ALEC if that was your attitude. You're builders, not destroyers. We want to build up the residents in public housing, not bring them down. We want to build up Cabrini and Rockwell and LeClaire and Bromley Heath and Kenilworth Parkside. We don't want any more Pruitt-Hygos. Our answer to the problems of Jerusalem and the problem of the cities is not to tear down, is to build. And HUD Secretary Nehemiah got all his buddies together and he said, come, let us rebuild. Sanballat and Tobiah and Geshem's tried to get him to stop his good work. You'll be attacked for your positive ideas. Men and women with good ideas always get attacked. Nehemiah was attacked by Sanballat and Tobiah and Geshem relentlessly, but he never gave up. He never took his hand off the plow. I want the conservative movement in America at all levels to be builders, to be bridge builders, to have the spirit of Nehemiah and the courage of a Kimmy Gray and the wisdom of those values that all of us share in a Jewish and Christian tradition. And those who say it can't be done, just tell them when you're in Monterey about Joe Montana, the quarterback of the San Francisco 49ers. Great story today. Jerry Rice, the end of the great end. Sorry about my Cincinnati friends. But Joe Montana was faced with 97 yards to go, a minute and a half to get a touchdown. They were down by 3 points. And he walked in the huddle and told his team, okay, buddy, okay, fellas, let's get this over with. Now, I want to ask you a question. What if he'd walked in huddle and said, has anybody got a good play? What if there'd been some doubt in his voice? What if he had talked to his team about how big the Cincinnati Bengals were, or how far they had to go, or how short a time it was, or he didn't think this play would work, but why don't they give it a try? Every great quarterback, every great builder, every great coach, every great military leader, every great legislator, every great mama and papa knows how to instill in their children and their leader, in their constituents and in their electorate a sense that we can do it. And I want you to know I believe in you. And I believe in this country. And I believe in the principles upon which ALEC was founded. And I believe we can do it. And I not only think we can influence the ghetto and the barrio, I think we can have influence in Gdansk, Poland, and Tiananmen Square, and Africa, and Asia, and Latin America, because someday someone's going to ask us, hey, Dad, hey, Mom, where were you when 1989 rolled around? What were you doing? And I want to be able to say, I was at HUD, or I was a state legislator, or I was a businessman or woman, or I was doing this or that, but I want to be there. I want to be there with this president. I want to be there with our values. I want to be there with our ideas, and I want the world to know that not only were we there, that we cared, and we made a difference, and that we were the true revolutionaries who made the American Revolution of 1776 come to reality, not only for the people of this country, but for the people of the world. That'll be a great day. God bless you. God bless America. God bless ALEC. Thank you very much.